Hey guys, welcome to another video. Purple Political Talk here. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the 2020 presidential election in hindsight. And we're going to be discussing how would the electoral map look like if COVID-19 was a factor, and answer a big question that a lot of people have out there. If COVID-19 was not been a factor, if it had not killed as many Americans as it did, and if it wasn't as serious as it was, could have President Donald Trump won re-election and another term in the White House? This is a question that is valid because looking back in retrospect, I think it becomes clear that the messaging on the part of the Democrats heavily relied on COVID-19. That was one of Joe Biden's biggest talking points as a candidate. So, if it wasn't there, how would the electoral map shaped and looked like? So we're going to be answering this and a lot more in this video. But before we do, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So first thing is for sure, this electoral map would have looked a lot different. It would have been shifted in many ways. In that, one, the Democrats were going to have a little bit more of trouble of holding down a message. Recently on the channel, I've talked about how the Democrats are currently facing, if not will face in the future, and quote-unquote identity crisis. So, essentially, what am I talking about here? It's mostly talking about the Democratic Party facing a little bit of a struggle with the progressives and actually coming up with a message that appeals to voters. Like, the Republicans currently have a message that is very appealing to a lot of voters, especially in the Midwest. And that's where you're getting your electoral votes. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And that was, their message was, America first, economic growth, that type of message. Now, the Democrats, they were able to win because of the pandemic. But again, this identity crisis probably would have come into place, like finding a message earlier, because if it wasn't for the pandemic, Joe Biden's campaign was really much pandemic and dealing with its aftermath. Of course, President Trump was also talking about the pandemic a little bit, but I think it would be interesting to see if the Democratic Party would have gone under pressure. That's the first thing. And truly, if Donald Trump would have been popular if it wasn't for the pandemic. But I think that's something that's going to have to be analyzed at a state-by-state level. So those are, by the time I've been finished talking to you guys, I already filled in the Democratic safe states, or states that I would expect Democrats to win by over 15%. Now, let's go on to the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party would have done pretty well in the general areas they did perform well in. I think that, for example, in states like Utah, which narrowed down a little bit, and Joe Biden made considerable gains in the state, I think those states probably would have gone further to the right. I think South Carolina would have not been contested. It could have been a little bit closer than usual, but I don't think it would have gone under the 15% mark. Same thing applies here in Alaska. A lot closer than usual during this election, but I think without it, it would be a little bit it would go a little bit more to the right. And Alaska is a state that has not been hit as hard with COVID-19, as they're more isolated from the U.S. However, they still have been hit. As all 50 states are hit by the pandemic. So this is what we have so far with our safe states. President Trump at 125, President-elect Biden at 190. Now here's what's going to be interesting. Filling up this map and talking about where each party could have fallen without COVID-19. So let's get started. So I want to start off with our Democratic likely states. So I think without COVID-19, the Democrats would have won by likely margins in Colorado. They still would have won probably by likely margins in Virginia. Same thing in New Hampshire. I think Virginia could have narrowed down a little bit. It's the same thing in New Hampshire. But Colorado, I think, is going to stay in the same place. Maybe some suburban voters, maybe 1 or 2%. But I think, generally speaking, those states would stay the same. I think one of the big omissions from the Democratic likely column that we saw turn very, very good results for the vice president is Minnesota. I think the state of Minnesota, if COVID-19 was not a factor, we would be seeing a lot closer of a race in that state. So generally speaking, these states probably would have voted similar to where they are now. Now let's go on to the likely column for the Republicans. I think we're going to start seeing a shift here. I think easily Texas could have been expanded to more of what they received. So they received around 5%, 6% of the vote more on the Republicans. They won by that margin. Probably going to be expanded to around 8%, similar to 2016 numbers. I think Iowa and Ohio would have stayed regardless with President Trump. And if under these conditions where COVID-19 really was a big thing, they voted by the same margins that in 2016 or similar margins, only less than a percentage point difference, I think it's very plausible to say that these states probably would have voted by a little bit more. I would even see Ohio or Iowa, if it wasn't for COVID, go into the over 10% mark, which a couple years back, when Barack Obama was the winner in these states, it sounded insane to say that Republicans are going to be winning here by so much, a mere 8 years later. So I think those states would have been expanded, and I think a state like Florida might be expanded into the likely column for the Republican Party. This is considering they lost some support down in this Tampa Bay area. That's a very big impact on the Republicans' votes statewide, and they lost a lot of voters down here in the I-4 belt. And truly, the Republicans made gains in Florida, not because they kept the voters in the swinger counties, in Duval County, but because they gained so much support down south in Miami. If COVID-19 was not a factor and Trump hadn't isolated so many of the voters up in Duval or up the voters in Tampa Bay, I think they could have gotten this by over 5%, making it one of the largest victories. All of this considering COVID-19 was not a factor in that state. So these are the states right now that I think would fall under the likely column for Donald Trump if COVID-19 had not been a factor during this election. So now that we talked about the likely states, let's talk about the states that would go from anywhere from 1 to 5 percentage points in favor of the Republican Party. I think states like North Carolina easily would have stayed in that column. And I think with COVID-19, it definitely got closer, yet President Trump was able to carry the state by a narrow margin, yes. But without COVID-19, which really impacted the opinions of voters, especially in the more suburban areas in the state, which are growing. North Carolina is currently a growing state where they're having a lot of growing suburbs. I think President Trump could have expanded his lead here. And look, at this point in time, without the pandemic, I think it's pretty easy to say that Joe Biden would be losing ground from what he had in or what his results were during this election. So I think if COVID-19 was not a factor, I think somewhere like Georgia would have voted for President Trump by around a percentage point. So he lost the state, so this would be a flip, according to this prediction or this alternate history. Now, I would say so because, again, first thing you have to consider, Georgia was only decided by less than 15,000 votes. That is absolutely nothing. Speaking about a state that has over 4 million voting residents. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that I think Trump wasn't popular, yet there was support for Republicans out there. And I think if it wasn't for his COVID handling, he would have been a lot more popular. And the Democrats probably wouldn't have had too much of a message. Because again, when I go back to saying a lot of these things, I mean, go back and rewatch a lot of the election. For example, watch the debates again. Think about how big of a impact COVID-19 was. I mean, of course, COVID-19 was a big factor, but Biden campaigned on it so hard. So without it, what could have happened? I think Biden would have been pretty much almost done for without COVID-19. I think Trump could have won Georgia by around 1.5%. A victory is a victory, though. So I think that would have happened if it wasn't for COVID-19. But I think, yeah, COVID-19 really helped out Biden because I think Georgia, they needed just a little bit of a nudge for it to flip. Now, I think that's where it would fall for the Republicans. Now, for the Democrats, I think they would have had a lean race in Nevada, similar victory as we saw, I guess during the election. I think it wouldn't have been shifted too much if it was in COVID-19. Technically speaking, it would have, because there was a mass exodus from the state, from Las Vegas. All those casino workers started moving out and going elsewhere, so that would have been a little bit more of a progressive base that could have increased the support. But generally speaking, if COVID-19 was not a factor, I think Biden could have done a little bit better here, if not stay the same. Which is it's hard to believe sometimes. It's as I'm saying it out loud, because with COVID-19, you would expect Donald Trump to do better in everywhere, just universally in the whole country. But I think in scenarios like Nevada, I think Biden could have done better, as that economy would have been a little bit better, and that economy, it runs with a lot of progressive ideas. So that is the state of Nevada, and I think it would have gone by a lean margin. I think in the state of Minnesota, Trump could have made it a lot narrower. I think he could have made it into the lean margin if it wasn't for COVID. Again, these are a lot of more conservative folks. They're conservative liberals, which sounds crazy to say. They have a big conservative population, a big liberal population in the state. And at the end of the day, they really got close to voting for him in 2016. If it wasn't for COVID, I think this race could have gone to Joe Biden by maybe 3 points. I think Donald Trump could have definitely narrowed down the margins in those states. And at one state, or one district rather, that I forgot to fill in, I think Maine's 2nd congressional district, Donald Trump could have won that district by over a percentage point if it wasn't for COVID. I think he would have become more popular. So that's one thing to analyze. I think that's a district that often gets forgotten. Yeah, I think President Trump could have carried that by a little bit more. Now, I think that the more interesting part is seeing where Nebraska would fall. That's the other congressional district that is divided. And then pretty much deciding in the election with Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. So I think in the state of Wisconsin, I think President Trump could have won here if it wasn't for COVID. It definitely did hit him hard. And if you think about it, his economic policies were very popular here. That is something that we have to analyze. I mean, even though he was quote-unquote unpopular, if you listen to the mainstream media, which at this point in time, I, as an independent, I, as an unbiased news source, I've come to the conclusion that the mainstream media is somewhere that it's very unhealthy for the country. The mainstream media really hated these ideas, yet they turned out to seem pretty popular, as Donald Trump got a pretty decent showing in Wisconsin, even though he was expected to lose by 8 percentage points. I think he probably would have won here by around half a percentage point. Narrow victory, maybe increasing from his 2016 numbers, if not narrow, but I think he could have won if it wasn't for COVID. I would say a similar thing would happen in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. I would say that would really pretty much help out the president. And I would say that truly that's a conservative district that just ends up voting for liberals in times of crisis, or when you have a very, very, I guess, progressive, very progressive voice. So I think Donald Trump could have won there like he did in 2016. And he would just need 10 electoral votes to win the election. Could have he gotten them? Yes. I think Arizona would have voted for President Trump if it wasn't for COVID. As, this state, it ended up just voting for Biden by a tiny margin. It wasn't this big landslide people were expecting. It wasn't this big result. So I think that truly President Trump could have won there. I think that would have been enough to tilt the half a percentage point they needed to win the election here. And, I think a lot of the suburban voters, Phoenix is a very big area right now. It's a growing part of the country. And simply, I think, without COVID, which really hit Arizona at some stages of the pandemic, I think President Trump could have been doing very well here. Now, when it comes to the Rust Belt, I think Biden could have won Michigan. I think Michigan's, out of the Rust Belt states, the least conservative. They're the most liberal. And again, I just end up thinking that Michigan is more likely than not was probably going to vote for Biden regardless. By a narrower margin, of course. It's not going to be the same 2%. Yet, I think Michigan could have gone off a little bit differently. The last 20 electoral votes come from the state of Pennsylvania. This would have been a very close race. I think ultimately, without the pandemic, probably could have seen Biden win here very narrowly. I think it was going to be very close regardless. I would say that Trump could have won this 270 to 268. Although Pennsylvania looks like maybe a state that could have gone to the president. So Pennsylvania is a real toss-up. So, I mean, I'm just going to, for the sake of it, I'm going to give it to Biden. But it could have been like this. I think that's also a very big plausible scenario. It was going to be that close. So that's what I think of this alternate history scenario if COVID-19 was not an impact on the election. And I think President Trump would have won this election anywhere from 270 to 290, to 248, 290 to 248, or 270 to 260. I think that would have been the outcome. Donald Trump winning regardless. So, guys, that was it for this video. I know that, for example, this is, again, not going to happen as it is behind us. Now, this would be interesting to see and to analyze what would happen. So, hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up. Like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.